Welcome to the Human Nature Channel. I'm your host, Alex Tamsula, and what am I doing here? Well, what I'm doing here today is a video in three parts. First, I'll start off talking about the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival Massacre Truth Community and its YouTube video investigators. Then I'll tell you about how I found my way to this community. Finally, I'm going to cover John Cullen, whose YouTube channel is called John E. Hoover, and aside from being one of the most prolific YouTubers on the subject, is certainly the most controversial. But before we proceed, a word about the headgear. If I were wearing something like this, holding my keffiyeh down on my head while walking around a Las Vegas hotel, nobody would bat an eye. Unlike, say, Pittsburgh? You'll see why this is important later. Anyway, let's get started. Mike Turber of 5x5 News, like some people in this community, is a serious critic of John Cullen. Serious critic? Hell, what am I saying? Mike Turber hates the man's guts. Mike has even gone so far as to do comedy videos where he lampoons the shit out of John Cullen. For an evidence-based guy like Mike Turber, I can understand why Cullen raises his ire. I, too, have found Cullen's logic to be awfully wobbly on some things. Cullen, all along, has asserted that since there is no photographic evidence of a broken window in room 135 until 10:30 p.m. on the night of October 1st, ergo, Stephen Paddock didn't shoot anybody. Well, just because nobody at the Route 91 festival or on the Vegas Strip that night saw a broken window at first glance, it doesn't necessarily follow no window was broken. Even if people were looking in the direction of Mandalay Bay at 1,200 feet, if they didn't know where to look, if they didn't have binoculars or a telephoto lens on a camera aimed at the hotel, that is all reflective surfaces, has spotlights on it, is in an extremely well-lit area creating a haze of light, what does that prove? Not much from what I can tell, but that doesn't stop John from jumping to the conclusion that shots were coming from helicopters full of Saudi Air National Guardsmen who were in town for some gambling, a show, and a massacre. I once sent John Cullen a comment on one of his YouTube videos where I told him, I'm an agnostic on the helicopter story. Shaky cell phone video or police dash cam video of flashing lights in the sky? That doesn't really close the deal for me. I don't see anything particularly conclusive. And I don't think John Cullen is as careful as he ought to be. He has walked back some things, he has apologized for errors. But John, I think, with his certainty that the Las Vegas shooting is connected to the purge of Saudi princes staged by Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has jumped ahead way too far into any chain of logic. It leaves him wide open to criticism. However, in a way, John may be onto something. In the third part of this video, I will add a couple of possible puzzle pieces I don't believe John has ever considered, which may make the part of his theory about MBS more compelling. Next, I want to say a few words about Mike Turber at 5x5 News. Since I was writing about Mr. Turber in the first draft of this essay, I thought it might be a good idea to at least find out what he actually believes about the Las Vegas shooting. So on Friday, March 8th, I listened to Mike's interview on The Hidden Truth Show, and I was impressed with him. An Air Force vet, cybersecurity expert, intelligence analyst, I thought Mike Turber was a pretty sharp guy. As you all probably know, Mike believes the only shooter was Paddock, Paddock's motive being revenge aimed at the casinos because Paddock, not right in the head, thought the casinos were cheating him. This puts Mike at odds with most of the rest of the community, but hey, this is a big work in progress. There are even a few things in my last Las Vegas video, number 7, the Las Vegas shooting, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, and Laura Loomer, that I might want to rethink after listening to Mike Turber. Was room 134 dead-bolted from the inside and therefore inaccessible? Mike is sure it wasn't. Like I said, work in progress. Anyway, getting back to Mr. Turber, I think his critical thinking skills are very good. His use of logic plays by the rules. His feelings about the fate of Melissa Ramirez and how her body was treated are righteous. I even like this one bit where he mentioned the hotel receipt to room 135 that showed room service for 2. Remember when that first surfaced? Oh my goodness. People were going on like this is the smoking gun. It proves Stephen Paddock didn't act alone. Well, Mike informs us that the reason Paddock ordered for two was because that was the easiest way to get a cart up to his room, which would end up sitting outside the door of room 135. If Paddock had ordered dinner for one, hotel staff would just carry up one meal on a tray. But ordering for two gets Paddock his cart where he can set up his camera. Mike Turber brilliantly clarifies this issue. As an amateur sleuth and wannabe spook, I live for stuff like that. So Mike Turber has earned my respect. He uses standard investigatory procedures, evidence-based, things you could take to a lawyer or put before a judge without wasting their time. When Mike says there is no evidence of a Paddock accomplice, he's right. Now, I've come to a different conclusion about Paddock than Mike does, although Mike and I do agree on one thing. There was sniping before the AR-15 with the bump stock started firing. My problem is, I'm looking at Paddock, who as far as I know was never in the military, and I'm not sure he's a man with enough shooting skill to pick off people at 1,200 feet. That kind of shooting is not easy to do, and supposedly he did it a number of times. I have yet to hear anybody say they observed Stephen Paddock practicing at a gun range. The closest we get is a story in The Independent, which states, investigators have uncovered surveillance footage of Stephen Paddock driving alone into the desert on the Friday before the shooting, law enforcement officials told the Wall Street Journal. The remote area, located near his home in Mesquite, Nevada, is often used by locals for target practice. That's it? That's pretty paltry if you ask me. I'd like somebody to come forward saying they saw Paddock practicing with a rifle, anywhere. I'd like somebody to come forward saying they saw Paddock shooting melons at 1,200 feet. I'd like somebody to come forward saying, I saw him fire a gun once. If Mike Turber and I ever have a chance to sit down and talk about these things, I'm sure it will be lively. Anyway, before I go any further, I'd like to mention some people I've encountered in the Las Vegas shooting truth community and how they've made me feel welcome. There is KL, who can be seen as a moderator on Paladin White Hat's live chats. KL has subscribed to this channel, watched my video number 7 on Vegas, Pittsburgh, and Laura, and gave it a thumbs up and also commented that she liked it. I would also like to mention Nini, if not intense, whose channel has made numerous deep digs into Stephen Paddock's mysterious girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, showing us a dimension of Mary Lou that big, stinking corporate media doesn't have the guts to get near. I sent Nini a link to my video number 7, and she commented back her thanks and said she would watch it. To KL and Nini, also known as Jen, I'd like to say, as someone who has had a mass shooting in his favorite neighborhood and knew one of the victims, your support is greatly appreciated. I want to mention 1005. Now, since I've been tuning into some of Nini's live chats, I know he's become something of a bad guy. But when I first came across his channel, I thought he was doing some really terrific Vegas videos. His were serious insights from the working man's perspective. 10 was a former glazier who, in one of his vids, tells us what we need to know about installing a hotel window and, more importantly, how to take one out. You want to break out the inner layer of safety glass? Don't hit it in the center, hit it down by the frame or in the corner. That bit of specialized knowledge blew my mind. And the window in room 134, all the glass on the left frame was cleaned from top to bottom completely, so that somebody could lean against it, ? Holy cow. Want to know how to control an unruly bump stock AR-15? Have the chair facing you, so the rifle's bipod can hook over the back of the chair and brace the chair with your body and your knees. Yes, I said when I heard that, because I covered the hard-to-control nature of the bump stock in my video number 7. And 10 talked about the ammonium nitrate and fuel oil in Paddock's car in the valet parking space, which plays a big role in the scenario I'll lay out in the final part of this video. However, lately, sadly, I've been hearing some strange stuff about 10. That's distressing. But keep this in mind. It's possible somebody may have gotten to 10 and scared the shit out of him. Those aforementioned videos of his, he took them down, and maybe because he said too much and is now wigging out. Let's not kid ourselves. If we're correct and Paddock didn't act alone, if there's a national security angle here, this could be some dangerous shit. Safety in numbers. I also wish to mention Aces Wild MMA LV, the first person in the Las Vegas truth community I had an ongoing conversation with. And it was over this interesting factoid. Did you know Stephen Paddock didn't even die in Las Vegas? No, Paddock died in Paradise, Nevada. Las Vegas proper begins in the downtown section. The Vegas Strip is actually in the unincorporated town of Paradise. Interesting, because if, at the heart of the Las Vegas shooting, is an ISIS attack, as some have claimed, including ISIS, then Paradise would be the place where Middle Eastern terrorists would want to go. Lastly, a hello to the subject of this video himself, John Cullen. In a tweet to him, I put a link to my video number 7, and he gave it a retweet. Even though I'm putting you on the hot seat, John, I want to say thanks. The Las Vegas shooting truth community is not about manufactured outrage. These folks are genuinely angry, are genuinely hurting, and they are the real deal. Watching ordinary citizens, brave Americans, stand up and point out that the Las Vegas Metro Police Department's FIT report had autopsies that sometimes followed protocol and sometimes didn't, had forensics with no apparent attempts to determine ballistics and or trajectories, where Stephen Paddock's time of death was marked down the next day as 12 noon October 2nd, where no attempt was made to determine exactly when Paddock died, watching citizens call bullshit on all this hurried and therefore sloppy investigating is inspiring. Understand this, there's a problem with Paddock's height in the autopsy, which I think has him 2 inches shorter than what is marked down on his Alaskan fishing license. Same with the autopsy's different eye color from what the fishing license photo shows. There's just too many WTF moments to leave the Las Vegas shooting truth community satisfied. Then we get to the FBI's 3-page report that concluded Stephen Paddock sought the infamy of his bank robber father, Benjamin Hoskins Paddock, a career criminal who had once been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, but a man who 99.999% of the American public had never even heard of before. What kind of infamy is that? The Las Vegas shooting truth community is not at peace with the explanations from the LVMPD or the FBI, because it looks as if these local and federal law enforcement agencies made up their collective minds early that Stephen Paddock was the lone shooter, and that was that. Now, all evidence must point toward his guilt, and anything that contradicts that conclusion will be ignored. Thankfully, the Las Vegas shooting truth community dares to demonstrate what we should come to expect from the best of us. I might add that there is a highly likely reason why the explanations from the FBI are so thin, aside from this being all the FBI investigators could agree on, and it has something to do with in the interests of national security. Like we saw during the investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, where the reason for the cockamamie Warren Commission story about the one bullet doing all these amazing things, from one shooter no less, was ultimately to protect intelligence assets and ongoing intelligence operations. In the interest of national security, our government is never going to fully come clean about what really happened to JFK or to the people killed and wounded at the Las Vegas Route 91 massacre unless we force them into and through a House Congressional Committee investigation. The government acts like it has some kind of mandate to read us all a slew of bedtime stories as if we were a bunch of little kids. Please pardon the mixed metaphor, but that dog don't hunt. We'll get into this more in depth when we examine John Cullen's general explanation of what happened on October 1st, 2017. Despite some misgivings I have with his methods, there may be something in John's overall assessment that is on the mark, and that involves the ammonium nitrate and fuel oil found in Paddock's car in the valet parking space in Mandalay Bay. The presence of bomb-making materials is highly significant, possibly tipping the scales in John's direction, since the intended bomb clearly shows that the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival massacre was originally planned to be something much bigger, as in wreck a building bigger. Let that sink in. I take a keen interest in America's history of political assassinations, terrorist attacks, and mass shootings. The Oklahoma City bombing? Afterwards, there were some residents in Oklahoma City saying the government and big stinking corporate media are not telling the citizens of this town the truth. The Las Vegas shooting is the same thing all over again. When I was much younger, around the age of 11, I started reading books on the JFK assassination, and since then I've spent a lot of time looking into what I call the insufficiently investigated crime. Do you remember Barry Scheck, one of the co-counsels in the O.J. Simpson trial? Scheck co-founded the Innocence Project in 1992, and as Wikipedia says, it was dedicated to the utilization of DNA evidence as a means to exculpate individuals of crimes for which they were wrongfully convicted. So far, the Innocence Project has had 362 wrongful convictions overturned. How does that fit into the notion of the insufficiently investigated crime? Isn't it obvious? If a person was sent to prison or death row for a crime they didn't commit, then the real perpetrator got away with it. And that happened at least 362 times that I'm aware of. Insufficiently investigated crimes do happen, probably more often than we think. And if you call me a conspiracy theorist, I'll turn my back on you. So, after all these years, here I was yet again looking into another mass shooting, this time Las Vegas. And little did I know what lay ahead. A mass shooting in my favorite neighborhood at the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh. If the noteworthy broadcast journalist Ann Curry asked me, "Alex, how did it make you feel?" I'd say, "Lady, there aren't words to describe how I feel." Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to rewind the narrative a bit. As with most Vegas citizen investigators, it all starts on October 1st, 2017. In the days and weeks afterwards, I saw Jason Goodman at Crowdsource the Truth putting out videos featuring Joe Napoli, who had been at the concert and was an eyewitness. At that point, I started following Mr. Goodman on YouTube and became a fan after watching interviews with people like Jack Cashill, who wrote the book Ron Brown's Body, How One Man's Death Saved the Clinton Presidency and Hillary's Future, which is, among other things, an excellent book on the sleazy side of Washington K Street lobbyists and how that money chase doomed Ron Brown. And another interview with former CBS News investigative journalist Cheryl Atkinson, who claimed CBS News had yielded to pressure from the Obama administration over her coverage of the Benghazi attack and Hillary Clinton, which resulted in Cheryl's stories getting shelved more and more often. Cheryl Atkinson is a genuine investigative journalist, unlike some people I could think of. As you can see, I was already following Mr. Goodman, and by this point was completely hooked on YouTube generally and on the kind of content Crowdsource the Truth provides. But there is a tug of war between being a content creator on YouTube and being a content absorber, and if you want to get any videos finished and uploaded, trying to find the right balance between these two activities can be a real pain in the ass. If there was a position that paid someone to watch YouTube videos 16 hours a day while scribbling down ideas on Post-it notes, I'm the right person for the job. So it was late October of 2017, if I remember correctly, maybe later, and Lionel over at Lionel Media posts a video on his Twitter feed of Jason Goodman and Laura Loomer in Las Vegas and of their appointment to interview the coroner of Clark County, Nevada. Laura and Jason were taken inside the public safety building, or whatever it's called, to conduct an interview without cameras. Then they came back outside and talked about their impressions of how it went. This was the first time I ever heard Laura Loomer's name or saw her face. And back then I thought, oh, Laura's interesting. Then I started following her on Twitter, and it wasn't long before I found myself absolutely horrified at the venal things this woman was tweeting. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this video talking about Laura, but I do want to mention one tweet by her in particular. It was about her indifference to the Uyghurs, the Chinese Muslim minority being put into detention camps in China, which was a story in the news last summer. We shouldn't be concerned with what's going on in other countries and worry more about what's happening here, Laura said, or words to that effect. Seems to me a Jewish woman wouldn't want to see anybody put into a detention camp, but not our Laura. I think her obnoxious behavior and attitude, which gets her kicked out of event after event like CPAC, and gets her banned from Twitter and Uber and Lyft and PayPal is an orchestrated attempt to provoke these types of responses, then run outside, whip out her smartphone, and make a video of herself saying she is being whatevered because she's a Jewish conservative woman. I guess identitarian politics isn't just for left-wing jerk-offs anymore. Normal people don't act like this, and I know batshit when I see it. I think Laura's trying to get thrown in jail so she could do 30 days in the county slammer, then steps outside after she's completed her sentence, greets her supporters, whips out her smartphone again, and makes a video where she proclaims, "Now they're jailing conservatives. Now they're jailing conservative Jewish women. What's this country coming to?" I'll tell you what it's coming to. It's coming to grifters running around getting away with their shit. That's what this country is coming to. Also, little Miss Bullhorn has been trying to muscle her way into the center of the free speech debate, which in her case I think is mostly a planned out scheme. Now, I know other conservative activists are getting debanked from Chase Manhattan Bank, which makes me think you know what they say about one bad apple. But if Chase Bank suspends Laura's account and then tells her to take her business elsewhere, is it because Chase discriminates against conservative activists? Or is it because Laura videos herself committing crimes like trespassing, gets arrested, then sends out fundraising emails asking people to contribute to her legal defense fund? Scammo, there is no defense to fund if you make evidence to be used against you public. If I were Chase, I would not want to be the banker of a grifter any more than I'd want to launder money for the mob. And I'd say to Laura something I'm sure she's heard many times before: you out. I mean, look at the way this hussy is dressed, displaying herself to stormy Daniel Shyster attorney Michael Avenatti. You call that investigative journalism? Get out of town. Thinking about Laura's exploitation of the Las Vegas shooting truth community for purposes of self-aggrandizement really pisses me off. And that's it in a nutshell. Anyway, enough about her. Still, this was my path to the Las Vegas shooting truth community, and I found my entrance when Jason Goodman interviewed John Cullen. I saw the Goodman-Jake Morphonius and John Cullen summit on the Las Vegas shooting, which became the most outrageous verbal free-for-all I've ever seen on YouTube, where hyper-vigilant Morphonius goes off on Cullen, accusing him of being a disinformation agent and hinting that Goodman may be connected to the Mossad, an accusation which seems to have permanently ruptured any working relationship these two had. It's great YouTube, though. There's nothing quite like it out there, and that's saying something. But I also saw Goodman's interview with Paladin at Paladin White Hats, and I said to myself, you need to start watching Paladin's videos. And I did. And next to Paladin's channel in my queue, I became aware of other YouTube content creators covering the Las Vegas shooting, like Sleep Depth Vegas, 1005, Brian Shields, 5x5 News, Sin City Digital Evidence, Mr. Visual, Charlton, and other channels I haven't gotten around to yet because Alex the Content Absorber is only one person. Anyhow, like all good essays, whether written or spoken, we now return to where we began, and that is the YouTube channel of John Cullen. You've got to understand how I operate. I'm not an investigator in the classic sense of the word. I'm not flying out to Vegas to look around for myself, not interviewing witnesses, not going through hotel records. I'm just somebody who watches YouTube videos and thinks about them. For example, if I'm going through a John Cullen video looking for stuff that's interesting, I might say, I haven't found anything interesting here yet. Nothing that nudges me away from the impression I have from all the Vegas shooting videos I've seen so far that there were two fixed shooting positions. If John is right about the helicopters, wouldn't you need at least one stationary helicopter everybody would be able to see from 1,200 feet away just to make the facts fit? Now, there were helicopters in the air that night, even as the shooting was going on. I've watched videos of witnesses saying we heard helicopters. So, what is interesting to me is the fact that helicopters were present. For what purposes? Observation purposes? For need of an extraction to get a specialist out? Bits like that get thrown onto my Big imaginary table. Yes, I have a big imaginary table. I watch Cullen videos and I see bits that don't do a thing for me. And then I see bits that make me say, hey, wait a minute. That reminds me of something I've seen before. And those bits go onto my table. I do this to everybody. Cullen, Turber, Paladin, Brian Shields, Nini, everybody. So, I've got this big imaginary table with this big imaginary pile of shit on it. And I stare at it, waiting for something to jump out at me. And the other day, something did. Mumbai. I had a moment as I started to think about Mumbai. For hotels. Do you remember the Mumbai, India terrorist attack of November 2008? 10 members of Lashkar-e-Taiba, an Islamic terrorist organization based in Pakistan, carried out a series of 12 coordinated shootings and bombings that lasted 4 days. Among other places, 2 hotels were targeted, the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel and the Oberoi Trident. A hostage situation developed at the Taj, and during the attacks, both hotels were surrounded by Rapid Action Force personnel, Marine commandos, and National Security Guard commandos. In all, the entire attack in Mumbai killed 174 people, 9 attackers, and more than 300 were wounded. So I started thinking about Mumbai, which as you can see was a pretty large terrorist attack. Then I get this idea. What if the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival massacre was originally designed to be something much bigger, but the attack got scaled back, shrank as it were because conditions had changed? It's at that point I started leaning in the direction that maybe the Las Vegas shooting was an ISIS operation after all. What if the shooting was still big enough for ISIS to take credit for it, but now small enough so the FBI could get away with saying ISIS was not involved, thus depriving ISIS of a propaganda victory? I started revisiting some of the old questions, like why did Stephen Paddock feel it necessary to take 24 guns up to his rooms? There is one thing we can all agree on. There was at least one shooter. So Paddock obviously didn't need all those guns. All he needed was the .308, the AR-15 with the bump stock, and the .38 with which he supposedly shot himself, not in the side of the head, not under the chin, not even eating the gun as is common in suicides, but in his teeth, probably holding the gun upside down with his non-dominant right hand, but I digress. So why did Paddock take all those guns into his rooms? The standard answer seems to be, well, Stephen Paddock wasn't right in the head. Mike Turber on the Hidden Truth Show got into this. Paddock was taking Xanax. His psychiatrist wanted to prescribe him something else, but Paddock insisted on Xanax. That story I've heard before. Turber went on to say that maybe Paddock was autistic, somewhere on the spectrum. That story I hadn't heard before. Turber then mentions daddy issues. I don't know, Mike. You can't quantify that one. That's not low-hanging fruit. That's a rotten apple on the ground with a worm in it. This one is for the oldsters. Does anybody remember Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper who, on August 1st, 1966, went to the University of Texas in Austin, where he went into the tower, killed 3 people inside, then went to the 28th floor observation deck, where he fired randomly at people for some 96 minutes, killing an additional 11? Whitman went up into that tower with multiple firearms. He obviously wasn't right in the head, but at least he didn't drag along a box of target exploding tannerite and a vase full of plastic flowers from Walmart. So why did Stephen Paddock have these things in his room? Well, he wasn't right in the head. Can you see how this becomes kind of a theory of everything? And the problem with theories of everything is ultimately they really don't explain much at all. I understand the law of parsimony, how the simplest explanation will probably suffice. But the explanation, well, he wasn't right in the head, starts to feel a little too simple. Let's look at Paddock's 2 rooms with the 24 guns one more time. I say, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If his 2 rooms look like they hold an arsenal, it's an arsenal. And what is an arsenal good for? It's a place where people can grab guns really fast. Not only do we have an arsenal, we have the makings of a car bomb, which thankfully was never completed. But why did Paddock have the rudiments of an ammonium nitrate and fuel oil bomb of the type used by the likes of the IRA, jihadi terrorists, and the Oklahoma City bombers? Like a friend of mine suggested, maybe Paddock was a well-read crazy person. Okay, but if all Paddock liked to do was gamble, when did he find time to read? Wearing their al-als that hold down their keffiyeh headscarves, wearing their Brusa shirts and thobes, Arab Gulf state high rollers in Las Vegas are practically a cliche. Since ISIS did put out propaganda videos before the shooting that said Vegas was on their hit list, it might seem like Sin City would be the perfect confluence for a jihadist attack. But we are told it wasn't. However, if keeping a lid on the objective reality of the Vegas shooting is in the interests of national security, we're only going to get told Paddock did it. So this brings us back to John Cullen and his focus on Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and how the turmoil in Saudi Arabia somehow spilled out onto the Vegas Strip. I would like to propose a scenario. I don't know if it's true, but I'm at my big imaginary table with its big imaginary pile of shit, and I'm going to put it all through my human nature filter, just to see what comes out the other end. What I'm doing is a synthesis of everything I've seen in the Vegas shooting videos so far, while looking for the thread of what humans are capable of doing. Why do you think I call this the Human Nature Channel? Mike Turber has come to the conclusion that the Vegas shooting was a tragedy that sprang from the mind of one disturbed evil man with an axe to grind against the casinos. That implies that those of us who believe Paddock was part of something bigger are chasing shadows. And Mike may be right. Alex Tiamsula, on the other hand, with his political science background, can't shake the feeling there's a geopolitical dimension to all this. And there could be a middle ground, possibly where baneful human being Stephen Paddock, a big nobody schlub with his losing streak and his one-track mind, has money waved under his nose and is manipulated into something murky and way bigger than anything he can imagine. Could happen. So let's say it's early in 2017 and Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman plans a surreptitious low-profile trip to the United States, Las Vegas specifically, in order to travel to Nellis Air Force Base outside of Vegas and view some fighter jets he's interested in buying for the Saudi Arabian Air Force. MBS and his entourage would stay at the Four Seasons Hotel, the separate hotel on the upper floors of Mandalay Bay. But somebody leaks this information to ISIS. Now's our chance, says Slippery Abdul, rubbing his hands together. The terror plot is this: a Mumbai-style attack on Las Vegas proper, but specifically focused on the Mandalay Bay, where bin Salman can watch the nightmare rise beneath his feet. 23 guns will be there. A straw purchaser has procured them. There will be a car bomb in the garage. Everything is in place. 23 ISIS fighters enter the Mandalay Bay, all coming from different directions over time, making their way up to Paddock's rooms. When it's time to attack, 2 shooters will fire from the windows at the crowd below, while the other 21 will split into 2 groups. One group going against MBS and his personal bodyguards up in the Four Seasons, the other group to go through the hotel killing anybody they cross paths with, or maybe even grabbing groups of hostages, or even taking it into the streets for a running gun battle to divide our counter-terror units a la Mumbai. President Trump gets a phone call that there is a terrorist attack underway at the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas, and that Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is trapped on the upper floors. All manner of counter-terrorist units would be called into action, and around the hotel begin setting up perimeters and staging areas. Word comes down that MBS is minutes away from being killed. All the counter-terror units go in, and that's when the car bomb goes off. Mandalay Bay gets a big hole in it. Or worse, it is the biggest terrorist attack of all time and a huge propaganda win for ISIS. If it manages to kill more than 3,000 people, it is the new 9/11. And losing a world leader? U.S. prestige had never been kicked in the teeth so hard before. Now let me show you something. We see the text Route 91. Now here we see the text for October 1st. We'll take the root away, then we'll take the October away, then we'll put the two together and... Okay, before you start accusing me of getting cute with the numbers, let me remind you of something. The Madrid train bombings on March 11, 2004 happened exactly 911 days after 9/11. Don't tell me terrorists are not playing number games with us. But Alex, you might be saying, 23 ISIS fighters hiding in Vegas, cooling their heels before a terrorist attack? That would be a crazy plan, because the more of them there are, the higher the risk of exposure. I agree. Groups of steely-eyed Middle Eastern men wandering around the MGM resorts, maybe casing the joint, might trigger a see something, say something response. Yes, the bigger the plan, the higher the likelihood the plot will be uncovered. But here is something you might not have considered. You're unconsciously picturing this group of ISIS terrorists as Arabs. Like I said, Gulf State high rollers in Vegas are practically a cliche. What if these ISIS fighters were Caucasians? What if they were Europeans or Russians or Canadians or Americans or Australians who converted to Islam, then went to Syria and joined ISIS, where they could rape women and behead men because theme parks just don't do it for them anymore? That's the weird thing about ISIS. I'm an old guy who lived through the Al-Qaeda era, and I remember reading stories about how Al-Qaeda was a tough organization to get into. If you wanted to be an Al-Qaeda fighter, they vetted the shit out of you. Saddam Hussein's intelligence service, the Mukhabarat, tried to infiltrate the group a couple of times and didn't have much luck. But ISIS, they seem open to all comers. Those foolish Americans, says Slippery Abdul, rubbing his hands together again. They can racial profile till the cows come home. But if it's a bunch of white guys, they'll never see it coming. Could Slippery Abdul come up with 23 Caucasoid ISIS fighters? Doesn't seem all that hard to me. These could be guys who, after battlefield experience in Syria, were removed to another country for special training. Prior to sneaking into the United States, they could have been staging in, I don't know, the Philippines? Hey, did that $100,000 check clear? Great, we're going to Las Vegas. Of course, it didn't go down this way. Perhaps Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman got tipped off there was an assassination plot in the works. And when it becomes clear to ISIS that the prince will be a no-show, what do? Shit, says Slippery Abdul in Arabic. We've put all this time and money into this plan. We could just cancel the attack, but I don't like that idea. We can go ahead with it anyway in a truncated form and risk a lot to gain a little, or we could contract the plan to somebody else. An attack still happens, our tracks are covered like nobody's business, and we can take credit for the whole goddamn thing because it's our plan. Get on the phone and see if Lashkar-e-Taiba is busy. Now, I'm not claiming any kind of certainty here. I don't know what really happened in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017, but what's funny is nobody else seems to know either. It would be ironic, with all the focus on Paddock, Schmaddock, and who he was, if it turned out he was only a small cog in a big machine. But that's what's interesting about the human mind. It has this real hunger for certainty, which sometimes gets the best of us. This is another way of saying, like I did in my video number 7, don't get fooled by randomness. It could be this big mess was, as Mike Turber seems to be saying, just some crazy man's big random mess. The shit all over the place in room 135 was just shit all over the place. Maybe there is no rhyme or reason to Stephen Paddock, and he just happens to be the world's first meticulous psycho accountant, working his way from microaggressions to mass death. But when it comes to the objective reality of a situation, it is what it is, even if it's still too camouflaged for us to see clearly. Personally, I'm not ready to say blame the dead guy just yet. I've seen too many other examples of that. And no, I'm not trying to help MGM Resorts or take their side in the lawsuits filed by victims' families and survivors. Yes, I know MGM would just love to have the Route 91 Harvest Festival massacre officially declared an ISIS attack so they can throw up their hands and say, we couldn't have foreseen this. I have an idea for a separate video on this subject. We'll see. About 3 months ago, before he stopped doing Vegas videos, I was watching one of 10:05's live streams, which he did around noon. 10:05 here, 10. He was talking about the fractious nature of the Las Vegas shooting truth community and how he was getting tired of the tone. Then he talked about some other things, and eventually he mentioned something that had been found in Stephen Paddock's autopsy, something I had also heard Paladin mention. On the back of Paddock's legs were 2 bruises, one on each calf. I said to myself, baton. 10 said nightstick. In video number 7, I talked about different ways it would be possible for a second shooter to escape detection. And in one scenario, I described him dressed up as a Las Vegas Metro Police Department officer and how he could slip downstairs dressed that way and blend in with the other responding officers. Who else is required to qualify at baton? Give me your gun, Steve. Stephen Paddock is in room 135 with 2 other men. One is now holding Stephen's .38. The other whacks Paddock across the back of the legs with a nightstick, and Paddock goes down on his knees. The first man puts the business end of the .38 against Paddock's teeth and says, "Thanks for everything you've done for us, Steve, but your services are no longer needed." So, troops, where do we go from here? Other than all of us banding together and pressuring our congresspeople in the U.S. House of Representatives to investigate and hold hearings on the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival massacre, I have no idea, other than race you to Capitol Hill.